Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here, D. Wood. And with me now, I have someone who was introduced. It was Jay Smith, right? Jay Smith?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I've seen, I'm familiar with, I've been familiar with Christian Concern for a while. I've seen your name, did not, but had not had never corresponded with you or anything like that. And Jay said that you were coming out with a new book and that we should get in contact. And so anyway, I just got the book last night. For everyone who's watching, I know this is not my normal time. Normally evening in the U.S., but different time zones and so on. And so for everyone who normally can't watch because it's in the middle of the night when you're sleeping or something like that, then you've got now. So enjoy it while it lasts. But anyway, so got your book last night, The Challenge of Islam, and it's got a foreword by Jay Smith, and the subtitle is Understanding and Responding to Islam's Increasing Influence in the UK. And a lot of people have a pretty dim view of the future for the UK right now. I even see lots of people who are from the UK and they're saying we're done. It's too late. Now I'm looking at it. I don't think it's too late for the UK. I just think that the longer people put things off, the messier it's going to be in trying to deal with it. Like there was a time when you could have dealt with it easily, and the longer you put it off, the more you push it off to a future generation, the worse it's going to get. But what are you? Why don't you? Now I know you're going to have a lot to say on these issues, but why don't you tell us a little bit about Christian Concern and
Sure.
and then and we can get into some stuff.
Yeah, sure. Christian Concern is a campaign organization. We campaign on trying to be a voice for Christianity or for Christian values in the marketplace, in the public square. We do that often with legal cases, helping people who lose their jobs or get into trouble for expressing their Christian faith, of which Hassan Tash, the great evangelist, is one example. And we've been able to help her get compensation from the police twice now for wrongful arrest. I think they paid her £10,000 twice for that. And various other street preachers and other people who get into trouble for their faith. And we also campaign on various issues in politics and go in the media and all that kind of thing and talk about things. And Islam is one of our issues that we campaign on. I've been working here for 9 years or so. Islam's a key focus of mine. My background is actually in finance. I worked as a fund manager and became interested in Islam, like a lot of people, after 9/11, sort of watching almost live on the screens in the office the terrorist attacks there. And I've been aware of suicide bombers before that, but I thought they must be poor, easily manipulable, illiterate people. And here you had obviously trained pilots who are highly educated, well paid, and not easily manipulable. And yet they're motivated to do this. And I thought, gosh, I'd better understand Islam and research it and get into it, which I did. So that's kind of, and then, there's a wider story which you can get into later on, perhaps, around how I got further into this with Islamic finance and all that kind of thing. But we've brought this book out here in the UK. It's actually hit a bestseller list on Amazon on Islamic history, I think it is. I can show you the screen if you want on that. Shall I try and do that? Let's try and do that. Here we go. Look at this. Okay, see that?
Uh-oh. It looks like you shared with audio. You got robot voice.
Sorry.
Oh, no. It was, there's a way to troubleshoot that. So you're actually going to have to sign out and come back in without sharing with audio. I only found this out. This only started when I switched to a new computer. Apparently there are some settings that I need to change, and I haven't done it. So you're going to have to sign out and come right back in.
Do that.
All right. Well, I should have warned him about that before we started, that if you share screen with audio, then it gets robot voice. So we'll see. Should be back to normal now.
In there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, I know you have some slides. So
Yeah. So I share those.
Yeah, there's some way to do it without. No, I'm saying there's a way to do it without audio. Just to apparently that works. Again,
was because it was a Chrome thing. It probably was because sharing a Chrome tab. If I share that, that's probably okay, is it?
Yep. Yeah. No robot voice now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, good. So, yeah, so we launched this book last week. Had a great event, so 200 plus people turned up, and I gave a little presentation. Very happy to go through some of the slides now with you, David, about like you say, the influence of Islam in the UK, which has massively increased over the last several years. Yeah, I think you can sort of talk about the challenge of Islam in three areas, really. One of
Now,
them is the
now,
apologetic.
do you want me to put your slides up on the screen?
Yeah, go on, do it. Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Yeah. So I sort of split the challenge of Islam into three parts, David. One of them is the apologetic challenge. Like we've got to work out how to give answers and explain, and preach the gospel and challenge what Muslims believe and all that kind of stuff. And you do a great job of that, of course. And Beth Peltlow and I wrote a book called Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends, which is basically trying to give people an introduction to that and give people some basic ideas. I think people lack confidence in how to talk to their Muslims about faith.
Yeah.
So we just want to give some basic ideas about, well, at least you could ask them how they become a Muslim or what difference prayer makes in their life or basic questions like that. And then you could get into comparing Muhammad and Jesus. Why would you follow Muhammad when he's dead? And you've got Jesus who rose from the dead, and Muhammad didn't perform any miracles, and Jesus did perform lots of miracles, and Muhammad who mistreated women, and Jesus who treated women really well, and all of that kind of stuff. And then you get in a bit further on into questions about the Quran. So that's a book called Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends. And then there's the theological chapter.
One second, Tim. I just wanted for people who, because what you just said, as far as there can be people who kind of don't know what to say, and so they don't want to engage because they're worried that Muslims are going to have all these arguments. I've been telling people for years that Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims that they run into, are going to use the same 3 to 5 objections over and over and over again. So if people are just prepared for those, they're going to be fine in like 95% of their conversations. But in addition to that, something that people never seem to get their minds around is it's okay to kind of learn as you go, to ask questions and then to go look it up. And I tell people that it's like if you're talking to a Muslim and he brings up some argument that you've never heard before, all you have to do is say, hey, I'm not familiar with that. That's interesting. Would you mind if I went and looked into this a little bit and then got back to you? And there's no shame in that. Like most Muslims are going to be like, wow, this person's really interested in what I'm saying. And he's going to think that you're going to go back and find all this evidence that agrees with him, when in reality, you're going to look it up and find that he's been kind of.
And you've got all the kind of stuff like the Bible's corrupt and all that kind of stuff in there. We've given this book. I've given this book to some people like teenagers and so on, and other people, and it's really given them confidence. And they're saying, "Right, I'm having lots of conversations now with the Muslims in my school, or the Muslims in this place or that place, wherever it is." It's really important to get the apologetics out there, and that book is one way of doing that. Mm-hmm. And then the other aspect to it is the theological challenge, which is like, do we worship the same God and all that kind of stuff. And what are the differences between what we believe theologically? Now, that one chapter of this book, The Challenge of Islam, is about that. But also, we have published a book called Not the Same God by Sam Solomon, who's a former Islamic jurist, which tackles exactly that question very specifically. But this book really is about the cultural challenge, which not many people are talking about, the cultural challenge that we face, particularly in the UK, but it applies to the West in generally, about how Islam's influence has massively increased and how it's affecting the whole of our culture, including politics now, and what we can do about that. And one of the things to do, of course, is first of all to recognize it and talk about it and diagnose it and see where we are. This chap, Trevor Phillips, was former head of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission here in the UK. So Trevor Phillips, back in 2016, in an article in the Sunday Times here in London, he said the integration of Muslims will probably be the hardest task we have ever faced as a nation. So, forget Nazism, forget communism, forget, integration Muslims. That's the hardest task we've ever faced. And he said that 9 years ago, before political parties had adopted the definition of Islamophobia, which we'll get onto, and before some of the more recent terror attacks, and before various other things we get into here. But nothing has happened in the intervening 9 years that has said, no, this challenge is getting easier, it's getting harder. That's kind of worth recognizing and worth realizing. I don't know if you've seen this video, David. It came out, I think it was in 2023. British Islamic scholar, on this in this conference, talking about Islam, Muslim influence in the West. He said this: when you look outside, you would think you're in a second Afghanistan, but you're in Londonistan. You're not a subjugated minority. You're the leaders of humanity. So the point is there, they think they're winning, right?
Yep.
They think, basically we're making London Londonistan. And it certainly is the case. If you go to certain parts of London now, Tower Hamlets and East Ham and so other places like that, it looks Islamic, it feels Islamic. There's lots of people wearing Islamic dress. Women are all covered up, all that kind of thing. It feels like an Islamic place. You could be in an Islamic place. And it basically is kind of Islamized in that area. So, they think they're winning and they're turning it into Londonistan, and they're not subjugated by any means. And obviously, we've seen since October the 7th massive protests here in London about the whole Arab-Israeli conflict and Gaza and all of that kind of stuff. And they actually, one in particular that happened last year, intended to lock down Parliament. So they had so many protesters, and they actually said, we want so many of you to come that they'll have to lock the doors of Parliament itself. And they projected this chant from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, this genocidal chant, onto Big Ben, our Parliament building there. No police action about a genocidal anti-Semitic chant there. And the Speaker of our Parliament broke with parliamentary convention because of safety fears for his MPs, or the MPs in Parliament. So that's a shocking thing, that basically you had an Islamic protest outside Parliament that caused the Speaker to break with parliamentary convention and change things because he was concerned about the safety of Parliament. That shows kind of a political influence, really, of Islam in our Parliament in London. And in response to that,
if only people had been like warning them for the last 20 years that as the numbers increase, Islam is going to become increasingly more aggressive and demand more and more political power and so on. If only there had been multiple people warning them for all these years.
Exactly. No, and if anyone would listen to those warnings, exactly. And Suella Braverman, who was former Home Secretary here in Britain, wrote a comment piece in response to that, saying the Islamists are bullying Britain into submission. She said, the truth is that the Islamists, the extremists, the anti-Semites are in charge now. They've bullied the Labour Party, they've bullied our institutions, and now they've bullied our country into submission. And she said, this is a crisis, and the fight back must start now with urgency if we're to preserve the liberties we cherish and the privileges this country affords us all, if we have any chance of saving our country from the mob. Extraordinary thing for a former Home Secretary to say there, basically saying the Islamists are in charge and it's a crisis and all of that. I agree, it is a crisis. And I think there's a lot of truth in what she's saying there. What we haven't seen is the fight back, particularly starting politically, although there was a lot of pressure on the government around these things in the news at the moment, around migration and grooming gangs and all of that kind of stuff that's been in the news recently, and Islamophobia and so on as well. So it's worth stepping back, though, David, and just looking at the demographics. According to the last census, it was 3.9 million Muslims, or 6.5% of the population identified as Muslim. And that compares with like 60 years ago, it was 100,000. So it's a massive increase in that time. Pew Research have said we'll get to 17% by 2050.
That's good.
Go on.
No, that's great. let's get it to 100, Tim. Just skip to the end of where you're. It's so weird.
Yeah. Well, already you've got 10% of higher education students are Muslim, and disproportionately 18% of the prison population is Muslim. So that's kind of where you are, and you might sort of think, oh, it's only 6.5%. That's the minority. Well, just there's a few ways to think about that. One is that LGBT, the massive influence they've had, redefining marriage, for example, that's about 2% of the population. So what they can do with 6.5% is a lot.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it's not 6.5% across the whole country. In certain boroughs, it's 30% plus. So look at there. You have this is from the census again. Tower Hamlets 39% Muslim. Blackburn were down on 35. Newham, Luton, Redbridge, Bradford, Birmingham. These are big areas,
Yeah.
and they have more than 30%.
Yeah, and it's basically so you have lots of rural areas where if you look at a map, there's like pretty much no
Yeah,
Muslims in certain areas. But yeah,
that's right.
it's the big cities. They're taking over cities
That's right.
as far as
Yeah,
numbers go, and it's really um you look at it and say, okay, 6.5%, guys. If you have 6.5% and you're bringing in more, and they have the highest birth rates,
yeah.
it's just straightforward mathematics. You could sit down there with a calculator and calculate exactly when they will reach certain other milestones as far as numbers are concerned. So don't underestimate don't
Yeah, I mean,
underestimate
certain areas within
6.5%.
those, within those areas, there'll be certain places where it's more than 50%, getting much higher than that as well. And certain wards of like Tower Hamlets and places like that as well. So, they're concentrated in certain areas, which increases their political influence in those areas. And the most popular boy's name in Britain at the moment is Mohammed. That's from, again, government statistics. That's the first time it's come top on its own without counting spelling variants. Of course, there aren't spelling variants of other names like Noah, Oliver, George, etc. But there are about 6 different ways to spell Mohammed. And if you sort of count them all together, it's about 13 years in a row now that you've had Mohammed as the top boy's name for babies here in the UK, which is just interesting to observe in terms of the cultural change. And then the average age of the population is 40. Average age of people identifying as Christians in the census is 51. Average age of Muslims, people identifying as Muslims in the census, is 27. There's your challenge right there,
Yep,
David.
they're younger. They're younger.
They're younger, they're more energetic, they're more enthusiastic, they're having more babies, all that kind of stuff. And we're just not getting the next generation growing in this. So that's a serious problem for us just right there in those statistics there. Don't you read this book, David, Among the Mosques by Ed Husain? Have you come across Ed Husain?
Nope.
He's a former radical Muslim, now a moderate Muslim. And he's quite good in terms of what he says, bearing in mind he's a moderate Muslim. But he wrote this book, Among the Mosques. And what he did is he went to the big mosques all over the country. So the biggest mosque in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in Bradford, wherever. And he walks in as a Muslim and gets access and everything. And everyone respects him and assumes he's totally on side. And as he investigated, went to these towns, he said, there are no-go areas for non-Muslims in some of these towns where everybody knows you don't go there unless you're a Muslim. Major retailers have deserted Islamic areas. There are no pubs, there are no chain shops, all that kind of stuff. It's basically become fully Islamic. Women are segregated and veiled in the whole community. And fundamentalist literature of the kind banned in Saudi Arabia is on sale in virtually every Islamic bookshop in these mosques. So the kind of literature that's banned in Saudi Arabia because it's too extreme, you can get it in Britain dead easy. Just walk into one of these big mosques and get it. Now, that's kind of shocking and disturbing. And I don't see any appetite at the moment to control this. It's extraordinary. And
No, that would be Islamophobic.
well, exactly, it would be, yeah. Yes, that's what he says as a moderate Muslim, that this is a real problem here.
Yeah, and by the way, isn't it just amazing that like 14 centuries, the Christians of Europe said, hey, whatever we disagree about, whatever we fight about, we all agree that we are not going to be controlled by that. Aren't we all on the same page? Everyone, we're all on the same page, right? We are not going to be controlled by that, because once you're controlled by that, it's almost impossible to come back from it. And for 14 centuries, everyone understood that until our lifetimes, when everyone decided that no, Islam's the best thing in the world, and we can't get enough of it.
Well, it's I do think it's a failure of Christianity, David. If we were strongly Christian as a nation, if the church had preached the gospel properly, then this wouldn't have happened. This whole thing wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have got as far as we've got, and this nonsense of multiculturalism that kind of preaches a gospel of all religions lead the same way, it all goes to the same God at the end, and says all cultures are equal and so on. blatantly false. I mean, there's a chapter in the book called "What's Wrong with Multiculturalism," and there's many ways to critique it. And you read the whole chapter, and so on. And now it is kind of acknowledged that multiculturalism has failed across Europe, but we haven't found another way to replace it, and we're still afraid of saying that one culture is better than another.
Yeah,
Um,
I just wanted to say a quick comment about multiculturalism because you
yeah,
have sort of there's been sort of different ideals in the U.S. and in Europe in recent years, whereas
yeah,
the ideal in the U.S. has been the melting pot, right? Like people come from different parts of the world, but
right,
it all
yes,
melts together into one thing. And
yeah,
so people still have like wherever they came from, like, their maybe holidays or their celebrations or their, the things they eat, the foods they eat and stuff like that. But and it, it doesn't always work out like this, but the goal is that everyone melts together into
yeah.
one
And all
big culture.
assimilates. They
Yeah,
all
where
assimilate, and they end up. They've got it, but the thing is, they've got to end up sharing some common values. So if
Mhm.
ultimately with multiculturalism, you end up with multi gods. It's like
Yeah.
multiple monocultures is one way of putting it. You have monocultural areas that are fully Islamic. You have other cultural areas that are fully British. You have other cultural areas that might be Jewish possibly, or some other religion, whatever. But they're not. They don't share the values. They don't share the identity. And ultimately, that is a fragmented society that can't survive.
Yeah,
Because unless you have shared values, shared morals of some kind, the society, ultimately will fragment and break down.
yeah, and that's what I mean. In the United States, it's like expected that everything's going to melt together, and you're going to end up with shared values. Whereas, I don't know, it just seems like in Europe with multiculturalism, it's that you're specifically not supposed to blend together because it's like it's bad, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
that's right.
if you come from Pakistan and you've got your culture, then if you kind of like adapt to European culture, it's almost like, oh, that's shameful because that's saying that our culture is better than yours and you have to adapt to ours, and that would be shameful. Therefore, when you come to Europe, don't adapt. Keep your same exact culture. And it's like they're doing that, but they don't realize. Okay, you're talking about people who believe in honor killings and killing apostates and all
Mm,
these things, and you're saying, yeah,
mm,
keep your values. Don't change your values.
mm, mm, mm. Yes, and assuming that all values are equal, well, actually, of course, treatment of women, for example, is a good example, a very obvious example, isn't it? In Islam, you have four wives, and women have to cover up, and all of this kind of stuff. David, listen, my son, went to a Church of England school. So it's ostensibly a Christian school, but we can ask about that with the Church of England. But anyway, and he was taught in a Church of England school that Christianity is bad for women and discriminates against women and treats women badly, and Islam is good for women, and Islam gives women dignity and respect.
Hmm.
That was what he was taught in school. And
Yeah.
when he asked the teacher, when he said to the teacher, doesn't the Quran say a woman's voice is worth half a man's voice, which is pretty much exactly what the Quran says? The teacher said, "Oh, that's an extreme interpretation." And when he said to the teacher, "Well, what about polygamy?" Then the teacher said, "I have to be careful what I say." Right? So
Hmm.
the teachers are promoting Islam, seemingly knowing they're lying, knowing they're lying about it, and afraid to say the truth about it. And even in a Christian school, criticizing Christianity and saying Islam is better. I mean,
Yeah.
how crazy is that?
That's pretty mental.
That's kind of again the breakdown of culture, really. So, David, in the last election, you may have heard we had this campaign group called the Muslim Vote, that listed all the constituencies with more than 30% Muslims in it. So you can see, I went through the the local councils earlier. Well, there's several more when you go to constituencies for MPs here, and one of them has more than 50% Muslim electorate on this. And they did a very determined campaign to get the Muslims to all vote en bloc, and ran independent candidates in many seats and backed other candidates in other seats around the country. Here's an example, MP. This is a Labour MP, Sarah Champion, in quite an Islamic area. So that image is from her social media, and campaigning for the Muslim vote, and making conceding Muslim demands. In fact, according to statistics, the Muslim vote weren't quite correct. Actually, more than 50% of the population in 4 constituencies already here in the UK. In 2011, it was 25% of the population in 21 constituencies. Now it's 30 constituencies. In 2011, it was 10% of the population in 82 constituencies. Now it's 120 constituencies. The difference between winning and losing on most constituencies is 10% or less of the vote. So that's enough to swing the vote in, 120 constituencies or so, roughly speaking. And you had, here's one of the candidates, Shokat Adam is his name. He is now MP. Election leaflets like this one, vote genocide, vote Labour, appeared in his constituency without saying who they were published by, which was a breach of electoral law because there's strict spending constraints and you have to report your spending on election campaigns and election adverts. This didn't do that, so it's breaking election rules. Shokat Adam's brother expressed clear support for Hamas and praised a Palestinian gunman shot dead after murdering a Jewish tour guide in Jerusalem, said he was a martyr. And you had someone else who was campaigning for Shokat, who's subsequently been charged with encouragement of terrorism and convicted on public order during the Leicester riots. And another candidate for Muslim Vote who was detained on the Terrorism Act in January this year and previously paid damages for defamation to a young teacher. So here's another chap who's now one of our MPs, MP for Dewsbury and Batley in Yorkshire. He told hundreds of worshippers, follow the teaching of the Prophet and vote for me. If you fail to vote, Allah will ask you, I gave you this blessing, what do you do with it? The point is, this is clear spiritual manipulation here, or spiritual abuse. There is an offence in law in this country called undue spiritual influence about elections. So the point is, you can't tell somebody, if you don't vote for me, you're not a true Muslim or you're not a true Christian. But this is exactly the kind of thing he was doing. He said Muslims got a duty to vote for just representatives, and gestured to the Imam saying, with the ulama as my witness, I promise to try and be that just representative. And there he is now, he's in Parliament today, having, it seems to me, abused the law. And one of Muslim Vote's demands was to change that law so we don't have a law on spiritual influence here in the UK, because they're openly saying we want to be able to express undue spiritual influence on Muslims to get them to vote our way and get them to vote for our candidates. At the end of the election, Muslim Vote claimed from their social media that they had 50 candidates that they endorsed who are now MPs in our parliament. 50 MPs that they say supported our demands and that they backed, and 5 independent MPs who got in there. Demands of Muslim Vote include things like recognising a Palestinian state, ending military ties with Israel, allowing Muslims to pray at school. There's a case about that, which I'll tell you about. Adopting the APPG definition of Islamophobia. I'll talk about that a bit more later on as well. Sharia-compliant pensions in every workplace. Talk about that in a minute as well. And removing that spiritual influence law that I mentioned earlier. So I think, David, that by the next election, we will have a national Islamic party here in Britain. I think this Muslim Vote is a precursor to that. There's another group called Independent Candidate Alliance that just sprung up this week for the local elections coming up here in May, that said they will put a candidate in every ward in Birmingham in May. So you'll have, I imagine, many Islamic candidates there. That's another kind of Islamic party that's starting up here. This is a very interesting chart, this one. This shows, like, you've got the portion of Muslims in the constituency and how much the swing was away from Labour. So basically, Labour used to be able to rely on the Muslim vote, and they lost it all pretty much, or lost a huge portion of it in the last election, and they're very aware of it. 5 seats went to independent candidates. Other people had their majorities absolutely slashed, and they're kind of panicking, thinking, how do we deal with this? And so Islam is very much a big deal in our politics here. But did you know, David, that in Tower Hamlets here in London, the council is run by an Islamic party today? Did you know that?
Nope.
So there's a political party here called Aspire. If you Google it, there's no website. There's no press inquiries. There's no publicly available constitution. That chap there, Lutfar Rahman, is the mayor. he was previously, back in 2015, found guilty of bribing local media, instrumenting grants to postmen, and exerting undue spiritual influence. He found guilty under that law and was banned from standing for the next campaign. And he is now the mayor. And that party is exclusively Bangladeshi Muslim men, and they control that local council. And they give undue amounts of taxpayers' money to Muslim charities and Muslim campaigns and Muslim groups and so on. And so you basically have here a local council already that is run by an Islamic party. And with the local elections coming up in May, we could see more of that. That's Tower Hamlets, which you remember, David. That's the area 39% Muslim. We've got those several other councils that are 30% plus. You've got a coordinated campaign. You could easily see it. And like I say, I think we'll have a national political party by the next general election in 4 or 5 years' time.
Not looking good.
This is a polling that was done last year of Muslims in Britain. Said only 24% believe Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th. 29% have a positive view of Hamas. 21% support legalizing polygamy. 32% support Sharia law. 57% want compulsory halal food in all schools and hospitals. And 52% think it should be illegal to show an image of Muhammad.
Half.
Yeah. So, that shows, there are moderates out there, but there are plenty who have pretty strong views there. Last year, David, I did a debate with Reza Aslan. I think you've probably heard of him, have you? Yeah, Professor Reza.
Terrible, awful person.
Well, I was invited to debate him on this question, is Islam anti-Semitic? And I was quite surprised to be asked, David, because, he's a professor and I'm not, and he's got 2 New York Times best-selling books that he's done. And while I have high hopes for my new book, I'm not sure it'll be a New York Times bestseller. But I sort of prayed about it, thought about it, discussed it with a few people and thought, heck, the texts are so clear. Mm-hmm. What do I have to do? I just have to read the text. And what can he say? How can he argue against it? So I did this debate. You can watch it on YouTube and get it on podcasts and so on. And I think that the text basically stood up. The texts are very, very clear in the Quran that, Jews are likened to apes and pigs, and they'll sow animosity and hatred forever and all of this kind of stuff. And then you get into the hadith and the one that's in the founding charter of Hamas that talks about rocks and stones calling for Jews to be killed if they're hiding behind them and all this kind of stuff. And then you can go into other hadith and also what Islamic theologians have said, and also anti-Semitism through the history of Islam and so on. One of the chapters of my new book is called "Is Islam Anti-Semitic?" and it basically goes through my research and gives you all of those texts and all of those documents for you to show that Islam, as defined by its text, the example of Muhammad, is anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitism in Islam definitely predates the Arab-Israeli conflict. It goes all the way back to Muhammad. And I think people need to know this and see this and recognize this.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny how Muhammad ended up like that, because when he was in Mecca for the early revelations of the Quran, his message was, hey guys, it's us Muslims and the Jews and the Christians, and we're all on the same side against the pagans and the polytheists and so on. So we're all on the same side. And he's telling people for years, hey, when the Jews see me, they're going to recognize me from their books, and they're going to say, wow, this is the prophet we've all been waiting for here in Arabia. And so he boosted up the Jews in the minds of his followers the entire time he was in Mecca. And then they get to Medina and the Jews are like, what are you talking about? We don't you're not a prophet, man. And so they make fun of him. And then, but it's his reaction is interesting because he's telling his follower, and his followers don't know what's in the Torah or anything else, right? So he's telling his followers, yeah, I'm in the Torah, I'm in the Torah, I'm in the Torah. And then the Jews say, what are you talking about? You're not in the Torah. And he's claiming it's as clear as day, which means if he's in the Torah and it's as clear as day and they're covering it up, then that just means they're evil, right? They're evil. They're trying to cover up what a true prophet is doing. and that
Yep.
means that they're evil, and therefore they have to be wiped out. They have to be wiped out because they're opponents of God. And
Yeah.
so that then it became they have to be wiped out, and the end won't come. You won't get your virgins in paradise until you wipe out all these Jews.
And then he did personally behead 600 Jews, didn't he, in the Battle of the Trench as well, and stuff. So it became very violent and so on. So yes, anti-Semitism is right there in the Quran and in the Islamic text. Um, and just moving into various other areas in our culture that are influenced. In education is a key battleground in culture generally. Everyone wants to influence the children. This school in Newham, which is in East London, was named the best primary school in England in 2017. The head mistress wanted to ban girls under 8 years old from wearing the hijab in school as part of their uniform, and she asked the government to support them. But there was a campaign by the Muslims against it. Standard Islamic teaching doesn't require the hijab till puberty, so it's a very hardline thing that says if you're under 8, you still have to wear a hijab. But the campaign was so strong that the school backed down and said, okay, yes, you can. And the chair of governors resigned. And we heard that 150 schools make the hijab compulsory here in Britain. So, which school now in Britain, if the best school in the country reaching out for government support can't stand up to this, no schools can stand up to it if they get a campaign like that.
And of course, they always do their best to send a good message to Muslims, namely, just throw a big tantrum and we'll give you whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly.
So it always reinforces it.
Yeah, that's exactly the message. This is a photo of a meeting of the APPG. APPG stands for All Party Parliamentary Group. It's kind of like a coalition of MPs and other parliamentarians. This is the APPG on British Muslims. So you can see what they're doing there in our parliamentary building. They're having a prayer meeting. So they're unashamed of doing that. And in Britain today, if you buy food like chicken or lamb from any of these major outlets, it's very likely to be halal. Britain has more halal slaughter than the rest of Europe combined. It's about $2.6 billion market. Basically, the whole industry almost of meat slaughter has now been Islamized here in the UK. And it's not labeled, so you don't know. There's no label on the package saying this is halal, but it very often has been, and that's kind of where we are. You have to buy pork if you don't want to eat halal here. And we had an international investment summit just last year. I think it was in October, November. And guess what? The VIP information pack said this menu is halal. Showcase the best of British, and it'll be halal. That's very interesting, isn't it? There's no attempt to sort of really showcase traditional British cuisine. We'll serve you halal cuisine. And we have fashion shows. Here's a fashion show from last year celebrating the hijab and stuff like that, while Iranian women are risking imprisonment by burning hijabs. Here we are in London celebrating the hijab. The big Eid takeover in London, they claim 350,000 people came to that, David. Right? 350,000 people. And, are there any Christian festivals in Britain that have anything like that number of people go along? Nothing at all. The biggest religious festivals here in the UK are Islamic festivals. That's very striking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest festivals. Yeah, you've been to London, haven't you, David? So King's Cross Station is one of the biggest train stations here in London. And guess what? Last year you had Hadith of the Day on the leaderboard.
Now I remember that because I was making fun of that, and I was like posting different. I was using a program to put more interesting hadiths up there, and I was posting those as a joke. So I was posting things about Jews and killing dogs and everything else.
Yeah. Well, it only stopped after some complaints and so on. You've never had Bible verse of the day, as far as I'm
Yep.
aware, in there. And they obviously picked their politically correct hadith. But it's again, it's kind of just symbolic of the culture that they would think anybody would think that it's sensible to put hadith of the day up on a major train station leaderboard like that. Um, then you have Arabic posters. This is in Britain, would you know? But that's just, again, symbolic. In London last year over Easter, no, there wasn't Easter lights. It was Ramadan lights, because we've got to celebrate Ramadan, forget Easter. Um, Again, very symbolic. Like, this is what we do in Britain now. We celebrate Ramadan, but we don't celebrate Easter. And that's where the culture goes. And forget Easter. It's extraordinary, really. Um, and we have these Sharia courts or Sharia councils operating in Britain. Estimated 85. We don't really know how many there are. Undercover journalists have found evidence of systematic discrimination against women in these councils. Surprise, surprise, when you read the Quran. Independent government inquiries confirmed that is happening. And that's a real issue. We have kind of a parallel legal system in this country here around that. And that's been one of our campaigns to sort of try and stop these from running. The big thing that they do really is divorce. You have many Muslim women who get married in a mosque, and they don't realize it's not a legal marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've just got a Sharia marriage. And then if their husband divorces them, which, as you know, they can just say, I divorce you 3 times, or leaves them or dies, they have no legal rights. The only way they can do is go to a Sharia court and say, please help me, and pay lots of money to them and hope that they're feeling nice on that day. So one of our campaigns has been to enforce legal registration of religious marriages, because that would actually basically make these businesses put them out of business. It's 95% of their business.
And
And it would also,
a lot of people don't realize how bad this problem is as far as having the
yeah,
marriages done in mosques and so on. Because one, that's how they do polygamy.
yes,
And I've
yeah,
known women who are the second or third wives, and yeah, they're not officially recognized by the government, but these guys will marry 2, 3, 4 women
yeah,
and girls, and
yeah,
they're just recognized by the mosque. But so this allows them to practice polygamy, but also allows them to it allows their wives to be recognized by the government as single mothers and to get benefits when they're married. They've got husbands. They've
yeah.
got husbands, but officially, as far as the government is concerned, they're single mothers. And so it's actually understood in places in the Muslim world, because in the Muslim world, in Muslim countries, you have to be fairly well off to be marrying 2 or 3 or 4 women, because you have to be providing for them all. You have to provide homes for all of them and so on. And so it's generally people who are sort of well-to-do who can do that.
Yeah.
But even like lower class, like poor Muslims understand it's in their minds. If they're in places like Pakistan and other places, if we can just get to Europe, then I can marry 2, 3, 4 women. Get marriages all in the mosque. All my wives are recognized by the government as single mothers, and so all my wives are paid for. You have governments in Europe, and they're subsidizing polygamous marriages, and it's just it's pretty amazing stuff.
It's crazy, and this solution of forcing registration of religious marriages is quite simple, and it would actually solve it one go. You would stop polygamy straight off because it's against the law, and you'd protect these women, and you'd stop all of this subsidising of people and so on. And it's been recommended by the Law Society here and also by the Council of Europe, and recognised generally as a good solution, but nothing's happened in terms of the government actually doing something about it. So there's another problem that we have here. And of course, we had an MP who was actually assassinated by a Muslim a couple of years ago, 2021. I was shocked today because in Parliament, when they sort of debated about this, they said, "Oh, the problem is social media. We've got to do something about social media. It's this horrible social media. That's what gets people angry and works people up." And nobody talked about Islam, even though the killer himself said that he was struck by a verse in the Quran which says, strike them wherever you find them. And he told the court, if you encourage someone in an act of jihad, it's a good thing. And he said, quote, I killed him in the cause of Muslims and for the sake of Allah. So, what more do you need to know, about him and about what he was trying to do? But nobody wants to talk about that. No, let's just talk about social media. Let's not talk about Islam. Let's talk about social media. And he wasn't the first MP to be stabbed. We had an MP stabbed back in 2010, Stephen Timms, stabbed by a Muslim woman with Islamic motives. He was very fortunate because he did survive the attack. But this is a problem now that MPs know that there are Muslims out there who will attack them or will be motivated to attack them if they say things or campaign for things that Muslims don't like. And in fact, we had another MP who resigned last year and said he's not going to stand in the general election because of threats to his personal safety. He mentioned attacks by Muslims against crusades. The same killer who killed Sir David Ames had actually intended to kill him, or would have gone him if things had worked out that way. He'd had a suspected arson attack in his constituency. Police advised him to wear a stab vest. He was like, I'm not doing this. This is, again, political influence by violence and by threats of Islam. People think, I don't want to do this. I don't want to say this. I don't want to speak up about this. I don't want to be an MP. And then that's basically dimitude, isn't it, basically, to the Muslims. Islamic finance. Islamic finance is a growing thing here in the UK. I did some research on this when I was working in finance, actually, David, because I thought, well, gosh, I ought to understand Islamic finance. And so I read up on Islamic finance, and I found that it's based on a modern radical interpretation of the Quran. There's a chapter in the book called What's Wrong with Islamic Finance, and you can read up about it. But I also sort of researching this, I came across a chap called Taqi Usmani. I don't know if you've heard of him, David, but he was on multiple Sharia advisory boards of major financial organizations like HSBC and so on. And he'd written a book in English. And in this book, he raises a hypothetical question. Do I still need to wage jihad in a country like Britain where I can freely build mosques and preach Islam? And he answers the question by saying, according to the Quran, killings should continue until they pay the jizya tax. That was like in print in English. I couldn't believe it. I wrote to a friend at HSBC and said, do you really think this chap should be on your advisory board at HSBC on Sharia advice? And he passed it to compliance, and they had a fit, and they got rid of him on that board, because I exposed it. And that they left his son on that advisory board, and I'm sure the other imams understood and possibly sympathized with his views as well. And that kind of opened my eyes to what Sharia finance is really about. It's really about legitimizing Sharia law, and the people involved really want full-on Sharia law. And if they get Sharia finance and people think that's okay, it's much harder to say Sharia family law is not so good. There's a whole...
The idea in Islam is always, so you have Sharia in all its glory, and wherever you are, implement that as far as you are able. If you can intimidate people into not talking about Muhammad, just through threats or something like that, or through insults, calling people Islamophobes, do that. If you can take over the legal system and then make it illegal and then sentence people to death for doing it, then do that. But whatever you can control. I don't know. It's weird. I'm not aware of any other ideology which is this obsessed with controlling everything around them, no matter who it is. It's always control as much as you can, and then continue building that control until you control everything. And it's pretty straightforward system. There's nothing confusing about it. But you take all our leaders combined, and they just can't figure it out.
Well, and also Britain was the first non-Muslim country in the world to issue a government Sharia bond. We actually have two Sharia bonds now, two government Sharia bonds that are governed to some degree by Sharia law. So it's extraordinary that we've gone down this road of sort of promoting Islamic finance when it is based on a modern radical interpretation. Most Muslims throughout history and still today are happy to borrow and lend out interest. The idea that Islam prohibits interest is a modern radical view. And so these major Western financial institutions and governments are pandering to a radical Islamic view, or interpretation of the Quran. That most people have interpreted it as prohibiting usury, which is the same kind of thing that Christians would say as well. Extortionate interest, not prohibiting interest per se. Anyway, there's detail on that in the book. In prisons, as I said, it's 18% of the prison population, and you've had Islamic gangs seizing control of wings and imposing Sharia law. Reports of convenience conversions to Islam for perceived benefits, like going to prayer meetings, eating halal food. Convert or get hurt is kind of what's said in prison. Copies of the Quran are left on bed of new prisoners to test how they react to it, and so on. So they're running riot in prisons there.
And
And then you've
people
probably heard,
people don't understand how significant that is, because lots of
yeah.
people just, what do I care what's happening in prison? I mean, in the U.S. you've got people and they go to prison and they have to join a gang. So what do I care if it's an Islamic gang in the UK and so on, and not
Yeah.
realizing there are people in there who are building an army for the future, and
And
you
radicalizing
yeah,
and
absolutely.
radicalizing other prisoners as
Yeah.
well. Even non-Muslim Muslims go into prison and end up becoming radical Muslims.
Yeah, and they're I mean, just imagine you get someone who they go and join ISIS, and then they come back, and the government doesn't know what some of these guys did, and so they give them sort of light sentences because they don't know, did you actually kill
Yeah,
someone? We don't know. We just so they'll charge them with
yeah,
participating in a foreign terrorist organization and give them like 8 years. But what happens during those 8 years? You have guys who were just trained by ISIS, and now they're going in prison and training other inmates to have the same mindset. And then you release them and they do it more. And you're locking people up. You're locking up, you're locking up various people for crimes, and they're going in there. And this is who they're around. It's like they're building an army for the future. In other words,
yeah.
these are as far as like when you actually decide, okay, we're pulling the trigger now and we're actually going to start subjugating the population, they're going to have a pretty good sized army just from the prison populations.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Um, and then you have these Islamic rape gangs as well. Again, there's a chapter in the book called "Sacrificing Girls to Political Correctness," because I think that's how I see it. People have been afraid to tackle them for fear of being called racist or Islamophobic. You have these awful stories of girls under 16. It's illegal to have sex with a girl under 16 here, and the police saying, well, we don't care about you, kind of thing. Even well, actually, obviously, an offence, a serious offence, has taken place. It's been going on for over 40 years. Actually, it's probably more like 50 years now. So it's not actually a new thing. White or Sikh British girls groomed and raped by mostly Pakistani Muslim gangs. Victims in Rotherham, one town, is 1,500. So if you sort of count this up, if you've got you've also got about 40 or 50 towns now where gangs are being convicted. If you have 1,000 victims per town, in 50 towns, that's 50,000 victims. Many of them been raped by 100 men or more. So you're talking about 500,000 rapes, but raped multiple times. So easily millions of rapes have happened in these. In one of these cases, a Muslim man who raped an underage girl was spared a prison sentence because his Islamic school had taught him that women are worthless. That's absolutely appalling. That is not equal treatment under the law. That's giving people an excuse. That's multiculturalism gone absolutely crazy. There should be no excuse for what you've done. If you've raped an underage girl, you should have the same sentence as anyone else, no matter what you've been taught. And we've had various victims or survivors have published books about this. This is one of them by Sammy Woodhouse, who was groomed from the age of 14, became pregnant. Police weren't interested in working out what had happened there. The police even caught her in the act of having sex with one of her perpetrators and charged her and didn't charge him. Charged her possession of an offensive weapon and didn't charge him, even though he has obviously committed or was caught committing a serious crime. And she has evidence of police collusion and police warning the perpetrators. She let her perpetrator groom her son into Islam, showing the Islamic connection there. And actually, Sammy Woodhouse, who went to the journalist Andrew Norfolk, who originally broke the story in the Times, which led to the whole thing being exposed. And so she was, quite courageous in doing that in the end. But there are many, many stories like this, and this is just one of them.
Oh, by
And
the way, that is I mean, the story of the about the grooming gangs and so on is they're horrifying and so on. But one of the small lights at the end of all this that I've seen in recent years is some of the victims actually speaking up now that they're grown up and are actually calling out what's been happening and so on. And that is I don't know. It's good that after all they went through, they're able to call this stuff out.
well, it is, and also what is new is that just in the last few months, it sort of became an international story. I think here in the UK, we've been aware of it for a bit. It hadn't actually reached overseas, but you had Elon Musk tweeting about it in December, January sort of time, and huge pressure on the government here to launch a national inquiry, which is necessary because, gosh, it's like 50 towns or so. And the accounts are that these women are trafficked across county borders. They're trafficked all over the country. So how can a local inquiry deal with that? It obviously can't deal with it. And Oldham councillors requested a national inquiry, and it hit the news because the government refused a national inquiry, and they continue to refuse it even after pressure. They instead said we're going to do 5 local inquiries. But there's no way you can tackle this without a national inquiry, and there's no way you can tackle it without actually recognising the Islamic aspect of it. Again, the chapter in my book called Sacrificing Girls to Political Correctness goes through the verses in the Quran that are used to justify this kind of thing and some of the evidence around the Islamic nature and the Muslims perpetrating. We, as Christian Concern, we helped a victim who had like 4 Sharia marriages and was forced to memorize the Quran and was kept enslaved as a sex slave for several years and stuff. And there are lots of stories like that, and Muslims, telling their abusers, you're easy meat, you're deserving of this because you're not a Muslim, so you don't cover yourself up, and all this kind of stuff. And there's a racial and religious aspect to it.
And that's how you're talking about as far as sacrificing them. That's I think it was like 12 or 13 years ago when I made a video about this, and I called it "Sacrificing Our Daughters." And it was, the point was, it is a pagan mindset. Like in the ancient world, the most precious thing that you could give to your god or your goddess was your child, right? Like your allegiance, your devotion to your god was measured by the value of your sacrifice. And so the most valuable thing that you could give to your god is your child. And so then we have Christianity, where no, God provides his own sacrifice. You don't sacrifice to God. God provides his own sacrifice. And then as people abandon Christianity, we have all these promises. Hey, things are going to get better and we're going to become more scientific and so on. And no, you go right back to paganism. And you do the exact same thing. You show your allegiance, you show your devotion to whatever your God is. In this case, an altar of tolerance or something like that. And you demonstrate your allegiance and your devotion to your new God by offering up your daughters on the altar. And so it's hope people are watching.
That's exactly it. Yeah, sacrificing girls on the altar of political correctness. That's exactly it. And then last year we had a man jailed for chanting "Who the F is Allah." He was not accused of any actual violence or even threats of violence, but the judge, a notorious judge, actually argued that prison time was appropriate because it was served to deter others for engaging in similar acts. There have been no arrests or charges for chanting "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," the anti-Semitic genocidal slogan there. If you said "Who the F is Jesus" here in the UK, you would have no chance of being arrested, let alone sent to prison. So there we are, police enforcing effectively a blasphemy, Islamic blasphemy code here in the UK. That they want to clamp down at anyone insulting Allah, but they don't care about insulting Jesus as the police. We had this big conference last year, the Global Peace and Unity Festival. Sounds fantastic. 50,000 visitors, 400 exhibitors. Here is a leaflet that was handed out at that conference. We say resistance, you should do antonym terrorism. So they're basically saying, don't say terrorism, say resistance. That's okay, and that they're using it to defend, saying armed resistance and genocide war crimes against an occupying power (brackets Israel) is both lawful and legally protected under international law, and therefore, mislabeling it as terrorism is wrong. So don't call it terrorism, call it resistance. So you can see whose side they're on and who they're supporting without actually saying it. It's clearly pro-Hamas, that whole conference there. This chap was convicted last year and sentenced for terrorism offences. He tried to murder Hatan, or intended to murder Hatan Tash at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. He also planned to murder any Christians with Hatan and any police or soldiers in the area. He had considered an attack at the Queen's funeral, but it was too late to do that, so he targeted Hatan instead. Credit to the police because they caught him on the way to attack Hatan. And hey, guess what? He converted to Islam while in prison. We talked about that earlier, weren't we, David? So he'd got in prison for some other reason, not Muslim by background, and became a radical Muslim and decided the thing to do is to try and kill Christian evangelist Hatan Tash.
Little side note there, because again, people don't understand the problem of converting and then radicalizing inmates. A lot of people in prison, they're pretty comfortable with risky behavior. They don't have a lot of respect for the law. They have a big problem with authority over them and so on. They're already in there for something. I mean, assuming you didn't catch an innocent person or something like that, they're already there for being lawbreakers. And then you take all of those features and you use them, right? You radicalize these guys. They're already willing to take risks. They're already willing to break the law. They already don't like authority over them and so on. And you take these guys and then say, hey, now do all of that stuff, but now you're doing it for Allah. And Allah wants you to. And he's going to reward you for doing all the stuff that you've been doing all your life. But in Islam, you're rewarded for it and not punished. And so you're getting some dangerous guys. And here's Exhibit A.
Exactly. Here's another guy who was convicted, I think it was last year as well. He killed a 70-year-old person and attempted to kill his housemate. The judge said that the murder of Terence Carney was a terrorist act in which he hoped to influence the British government. When you attempted to kill Javed Nouri, it was also intended to punish him for converting to Christianity, because that is not permitted by your Muslim faith. Hey, a bit of an enlightened judge there, David. And of course, he's right, because Muhammad said whoever changes Islamic religion, then kill him, and it's standard part of Islamic law that apostates should be killed. So there he was, trying to enforce Islamic law because his housemate had converted to Christianity, a dangerous thing to do from Islam here in the UK. And the current terrorist threat, according to the government contest report, is that Islamist terrorism is about 67% of attacks since 2018 and 75% of MI5 caseload and 64% of those in custody for terrorism-related offences. I have to say, the security forces have been incredibly successful. There have been 9 terrorist attacks since 2018, 43 disrupted on top of that. So an average then of about 8 attacks per year. Imagine how the country would feel had those 43 or more of those 43 been successful. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting, because I've had the same impression here in the U.S. that the people who are the people in the government who are in charge of actually stopping the terrorist attacks are more competent than I would think, based on what politicians are saying. When I hear politicians, they all sound like complete idiots, and so I think that the FBI and Homeland Security, that they're a bunch of idiots too. And turns out they're not, because my wife and I lived in New York, and I counted, there were 12 attempted terrorist attacks in New York in a row were all stopped. Were all
Wow.
stopped without a
Yeah.
successful attack. And lots of things that have happened over the years. Like one time I was doing a show. This was like probably 2011 or something like that. But we were doing a show, and a Muslim called in the show. It was a live call-in show. Called in and
Yeah.
threatened us. And then the tech guys after the show, the guys who do the calls, they came in after the show and said, as soon as as soon as they as soon as they hung up on the guy, they got a call, and it was Homeland Security said, "Give us the callback number of that guy who just called." So these guys were actually like, what? Homeland
Wow.
Security was watching the show to see if anyone radical calls in and so on. And it's just been
Wow.
over the years. It's been I've had just randomly police cars parked out in front of our house, and they'll just be there all day. I've had police show up and say, "Hey, we need to see David Wood. We need to make sure he's okay," and so on. One time, a Muslim said that if I met him in a certain, well, this actually happened a couple times, but one particular time he said, if I met him down in Manhattan, then he would kill me. And so
Yeah.
I said, I'll be there. And I went down there, and there were 4 soldiers standing there with machine guns. And and one time there were some threats, and the FBI showed up at my door, 2 FBI agents and so on, and said, "Hey, we've got some credible threats against you for some videos you made." And I said, "Well, there's a reason I made that." And they said, "Sir, we are not here to judge you based on what you do with your constitutionally protected free speech. We're here to warn you because there are credible threats against you." So the point is, lots of times over the years, I'm just like,
Mm.
these guys are actually way smarter than you would expect, given the state and politics. So yeah, sounds like there are some similarities there in the UK, and that behind the scenes there are some people who are paying attention and stopping a lot of
Yeah,
this
I
stuff.
think they do an incredible job. Yeah, and in spite of the politicians, shall we say? Yeah. Um, Way back in 1989, we had this big event of Salman Rushdie publishing the Satanic Verses, a book about the Satanic Verses in the Quran, which is verses that are alleged to have been inserted by Satan, that Muhammad said,
Mm-hmm.
were inserted by Satan, all that kind of thing. It was a massive event. We all learned what the word fatwa meant, because this fatwa came from Ayatollah Khomeini, that he should be killed for insulting Islam, insulting Muhammad, and so on. And we had these protests and so on. This is 1989, when the portion of the Muslims in the population was way less than it is now. And we had the Archbishop of Canterbury sort of saying, maybe we should extend blasphemy to Islam. Extraordinary thing for him to say. There's a chapter in my book on this. I call it From Fatwa to Fear, on the whole sort of going through what happened there, because it was a seminal event. Trying to ban publication of a book here in the UK by Muslims in Britain. And people did die of it. People did get killed for this. And of course, Salman Rushdie himself got attacked. How many years is it later? Back in 2022, he got attacked and stabbed and seriously injured, lost the sight of
Mm-hmm.
one eye, and so on from this. And the repercussions are still going on to this day. I've got a copy of this book at home, David, Oxford University Press. A very short introduction to Islam. I thought I'd be interested to see what they say. There's a blank page in the book, and in the small print it says, in the first edition of this book, this space contained an illustration from the famous manuscript of Rashid al-Din's Universal History from 1307 in Edinburgh University Library. Although the illuminated manuscript from Tabriz is widely recognised as a masterpiece, often reproduced, a small number of readers found the picture blasphemous. So what did Oxford University Press do? They thought, we'll better apply Sharia law and not publish a picture that a small minority of Muslims even regard as blasphemous. There's the
That
picture there.
that reminds me of I think it was Yale University Press. They published a book about the Muhammad cartoon controversy
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
Posten, and they didn't put any of the cartoons in the book about the cartoons.
This is even worse. I mean, this is not a cartoon. This is
Yeah,
a
this is
classic manuscript
this is
image.
artwork.
Yeah. So Oxford University Press there is enforcing hardline Sharia law, and blasphemy effects in its publications. That's where we are. It's kind of extraordinary they did that. But that's part of the repercussion ongoing. Everyone remembers Sam Rushdie, and publishers will not publish stuff that they think might attract that kind of attention. Um, we talked earlier about this APPG, All Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims. Back in 2018, they produced this report, Islamophobia Defined. And they define it in this way: Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Now, even as I read that definition, David, you can see so many problems with it. Like, Islam is not a race,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
how can you say Islamophobia is a type of racism? And
Yeah,
then expressions of...
Tim, what if I say, hey, I have a problem with child marriage and killing anyone who leaves Islam? What race am I criticizing there? I'm not familiar with what race I'd be condemning.
No, exactly. It's nothing to do with racism, but this is how they want to define it, as a type of racism. It's kind of cultural racism is the theory behind it here. And expressions of Muslimness, what does that mean? There's no clear definition of what that means. It could be anything. Oh, and in case you weren't sure that it could be anything, it says perceived Muslimness. So if anyone perceives that you've attacked somebody's Muslimness, then you are Islamophobic. That's it, by definition. So it's an incredibly vague definition, incredibly broad. Some of the examples in there include saying things like linking Islam with grooming gangs, criticizing Muhammad for marrying a 9-year-old girl, which are criticisms of Islam and not necessarily Muslims. But this definition has been adopted by the Labour Party as part of its code of conduct, by the Liberal Democrat Party, Scottish National Party, Plaid Cymru, various other political parties, and dozens of local councils have formally adopted this definition of Islamophobia. I wrote this report, Banning Islamophobia by the Back Door, for the Free Speech Union here in the UK, published last year. They managed to get Richard Dawkins to write the foreword to it. You heard of Richard Dawkins, I imagine, David. Yep. And I think they wanted an atheist to sort of discount the fact that I'm a Christian to make, so that people would think, oh, it's okay to read it because Richard Dawkins has endorsed it.
Smart.
And the full text of that is in the book as well, if to read that. And I go through all sorts of criticisms of this definition and examples of people who've fallen foul of it for various reasons. And there's real pressure on this. In fact, just last week, Angela Rayner, one of our top politicians, it was announced that she's, or sort of leaked, I suppose, that she's going to set up a council to come up with a government definition of Islamophobia. And the person who is touted to be the chair of the council is a chap called Dominic Grieve, who wrote the foreword to that report, that APPG report, where the definition came up. And then another chap who is touted as being on the shortlist for the council is a chap called Kari Asim, who was appointed as a government advisor on Islamophobia by the Conservative government some years back, and then was sacked because he campaigned for banning a film, The Lady of Heaven, to be showed here in the UK. And they sacked him, saying, you basically campaigned against free speech, so you can't be a government advisor. And guess what? Labour government comes in and says, let's have him as an advisor again. Kari Asim has said that all depictions of Muhammad are haram. So he's like hardline on that. And there's various other information about him in the book, in that chapter on Islamophobia as well. I was astonished to see that he's back in the frame. It seems like the government has no interest in actually preserving free speech if these are the kind of people they want on a council to define Islamophobia. Here's the protests against the film Lady of Heaven, which is a film about Muhammad's daughter. Massive protests outside cinemas. Signs saying it's not okay to offend 1.8 billion people. Baroness Claire Fox tweeted that the film ended up being pulled because of these demonstrations. And she says, disastrous for the arts, dangerous for free speech, a lesson to all those who argue identity politics is not a threat to democracy. Yeah. And of course,
they keep sending that message to Muslims. Just throw a tantrum, we'll give you whatever you want, and not realize. And keep in mind, it's the same thing with it's the same thing with everything, with the cartoons, with it's always the same thing. If you throw a big enough tantrum, we'll back down and give you what you want. Whereas all you would have to do is for everyone to be united on doing the exact opposite of what you demand. And you'd only have to do that really once or twice and they'd get the message, right? Like if you tell us not to play this movie, we will play this movie all day, every day in every city for 6 months straight if you try to shut it down. And then they would, okay. If we try to control all these people, they will actually do the opposite. So, okay, we can't control them like that. Instead, it's, what are you throwing a tantrum about? Oh, okay, then we'll do that. Then we'll do exactly what you want. And bad message. It encourages terrorism. It
And of
encourages
course, you know,
violence.
what it means as well, David, is that no film producer is going to produce a film that relates at all to Muhammad or is any risk of criticizing Islam here in the UK. You know, nobody's going to do it because it's not worth it. You know, you're probably going to get it cancelled. So you basically end up with self-censorship as well, as you already have in publication to some degree as well in the UK, that people are thinking, well, back off, I'm not going to touch Islam.
Yep.
And that's the repercussion of allowing these, you know, protesters, like you say, to enable something to be banned like that. And of course, we had this famous lesson on free speech, school teacher who wanted to teach a lesson on free speech, and in the course of that lesson showed a cartoon of Muhammad, and he taught the most powerful lesson he's ever taught in his life. The whole country learned that we do not have free speech in relation to Islam. And he is still in hiding to this day, 4 years later. When there was a by-election there, none of the candidates spoke in favour of free speech for the teacher. There you go. No politicians prepared to back him. And you know, everyone learned, you know, don't do this. It's, you know, and again, they were successful, and everyone backed down to it.
And that's a perfect example because Molly Norris years ago. Again, this is probably 2011, 2012 or something like that. But she was a cartoonist in the U.S. and in response to Muslims threatening the South Park creators and stuff over planning to have Muhammad in an episode, she said, let's have an everybody draw Muhammad day. And she drew like a teacup that was saying I'm Muhammad and stuff like that. It was all kind of like little cute stuff. But she was massively threatened with being murdered, and she's been in hiding ever since. So she canceled the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. So she did everything she could, and as far as I know, she's still in hiding. But after that, people decided to go through with the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day, and tens of thousands of people drew cartoons of Muhammad. Guess what? Not a single person was harmed as a result of that. Why? You can't. You can't. If everyone stands up at once, there's nothing they can do. And instead, we just leave one person at a time to take a stand, and everyone throws them under the bus. And it keeps sending the message: this is exactly how you conquer us. We will give you a roadmap for controlling us.
That's right. Yep. That's exactly. And people are afraid. And the lesson, that's the other thing that people hear about this kind of thing and are afraid as a result. We also had this instance of a Quran. There's a picture of it there that a school kid had bought himself. It was his own copy of a Quran. It got knocked out of his hands and dropped on the floor. My goodness. I mean, the police got involved. I mean, how often do kids knock books out of their hands or drop a book on the floor and nothing happens? I mean, who cares? I mean, it's not important. But, the police got involved. It was treated as a non-crime hate incident. The boy and his family received multiple death threats and threats of violence. And it's basically kind of like, gosh, any book you can disrespect, but not the Quran in a school. That's terrible. Mm-hmm. The local council there is one of those councils that adopted that APPG definition of Islamophobia, so therefore they can call this Islamophobic as well, and all that kind of stuff. And it's again, symptomatic of the Islamization of our culture, that police think that insulting a Quran or dropping a Quran is something that they should be concerned about. And then we also had, just last week, I think it was, a man who did burn some pages of the Quran in Manchester, and he was arrested and charged with an offence. And then also, shockingly and disgracefully, really, the police named him and put his ID out online, so Muslims could all go and attack him if they want to. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful that they did that.
Yeah, that was horrifying. Usually, what we see in the U.S. when we see things going on in Europe, when we read the news in Europe, if it's a terrorist or something like that, they use initials. They don't give people's names and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
And here you have a guy burn the Quran, and they're like, "Here's where you find him." So this,
it's
guy, I mean,
crazy.
this is a guy who tried to be one of the few people in Great Britain willing to stand up for free speech and saying, "Hey, I'm not going to be intimidated because you're killing people." And
Mm,
the British government said, "Well, we're going to help them kill you." And
that's
that
crazy.
is pretty darn creepy.
And it's not an offense to burn a book. Again,
No,
yeah,
of
why
course
is the
not.
Quran getting special treatment here? It's not offense to burn pages of a book. If you watch the video, he's just there and there's a few people with cameras standing around it and that's it. Like, so what? But oh no, but it's a Quran. So yes, we have to do something about this. Um, we had bomb threats to a school that wanted to stop students wearing pro-Palestinian badges in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. The protests actually forced the school to close 2 days early at the end of term because of threats to the staff. Parents were warned in a letter that they might have to revert to online teaching if the safety of their staff and children cannot be guaranteed. They had to put police officers outside the school for a week. They had to hire private security, and teachers said they feared for their safety over threats of violence. You see the kind of intimidation here. I think the school did actually stand up to this in the end and were successful in not allowing this to happen. Good for them, but they paid a price for it. Here's another school that also stood up to it, actually. This school is our top school in the country on Progress 8, which is like a measure of how much value you add to the kids. You get kids and you sort of predict what their grades would be based on how they're doing now. And this is an inner city, non-fee paying school, and they get fantastic results. But they're in an Islamic area, and some of the Muslim pupils were campaigning to have Muslim prayers in the playground and intimidating their fellow pupils into joining them, saying, "You're not a true Muslim if you don't join us," all this kind of stuff. And the head teacher said, "No, I'm not having that. We're not having this sectarianism. We're trying to be a multicultural school and have people all sit next to each other for lunch and mix and we can't have people segregating and praying. And it's not how our school should operate." There was a bomb threat. There was a brick thrown at a teacher's window, and staff were fearing for their lives, and pupils were being pressured. As I said, it went to court. It came out that the pupil who brought the case had been suspended for threatening to stab a girl in the school, but she brought a case to court for breach of her human rights, for not being allowed to pray in the school. Unfortunately, the school won the case. The court decided that they didn't have the facilities to allow this, and they couldn't be forced to do it. And so, the Muslims had to back down. But it took a huge battle, and again, a lot of cultural things. Some Christian, other people say, "Oh, why can't they allow prayers in school?" and all this. But it's actually much bigger than that. You are actually, it's a deliberate attempt to Islamize and pressure Muslims and all of that kind of stuff going on. And unfortunately, the school did stand up to it. And unfortunately, the courts backed them up as well and stopped it from happening. And Hassan Tash, I think you've spoken to her a few times, David.
Oh,
But
I've been friends with Hatun for years.
yeah, great. Yeah. Well, as I said, we've helped her on the legal side and got her conversation from the police. She's been assaulted several times while preaching. The police have found it easier to arrest her rather than to arrest the Muslims who are actually attacking her or threatening her and clearly committing offences in doing so. They don't arrest them. Instead, they arrest them.
By the way, I keep coming back. It's the same message every single time.
Yeah.
We don't like this woman because she criticizes the Quran and criticizes Muhammad. Well, just form a big mob around her and we'll arrest her. And you know the videos that
Yeah.
she would be standing in the middle of a crowd of Muslims screaming at her. Police would lock her up and Muslims would be screaming Allahu Akbar as police haul her off. And what message does that send? Just form a mob and start threatening people, and we will do whatever you want. And that's I don't know. The British government seems hell bent on sending that message.
Indeed. Well, and she reckons she's seen about 1,000 Muslims convert to Christianity, including 120 imams. And what we need is more Christians like her
Hmm.
over here in London, in Britain, who are courageously able to stand up and
Oh
say,
yeah, if you had a dozen Hatuns, I believe Islam would be cooked in the UK. If you had a dozen,
yeah,
if you had a dozen of her, so clone her now, and
yeah,
you'll be okay in the
yeah,
future.
yeah. Um, and then the book sort of concludes with 10 policy recommendations that actually would make a difference, which I put out in, I think, 2018. And of course, none of them have been enacted, but they're actually not necessarily very difficult, like banning Sharia councils. Why do we have a parallel legal system? Registering marriages, like we talked about, ban face veils. That's been done in 16 countries around the world, some of them Islamic countries. So it can be done. Why can't it be done here in Britain? It's obviously a security risk as well as bad for the women, all this kind of stuff. But we're too like, oh no, it's cultural. We shouldn't criticize it. Tighten marriage visa rules. That's about allowing people to continually bring in new wives from abroad. Ensure police enforce the law equally, regardless of culture, religion, or ethnicity. That's become a big thing now, more recently with two-tier care and all that. Stop promoting Islamic finance. Unashamedly identify the nation as a Christian country. Robustly defend free speech so that Islam can be criticised but prosecute incitements of violence. Ban foreign funding of Islam. Again, that's been done in a few European countries already. Could be done here. Cut levels of immigration. So that's kind of some things that the government could do but hasn't done. But I think, as you sort of said at the introduction, David, I think there's still hope. There's still possibility that things could change and things could, somebody could decide to get their act together and actually tackle this and do something about it. But the question is, have we got the courage? Have we got the guts? And will it be too late at a certain point? Or is it already too late? I don't think it is, but it's getting close.
Yeah, I don't think it's too late either. But I mean, people need to wake up and real quick, like, because again,
Yeah,
it's just a situation where, like, 20 years ago, you could have dealt with it pretty easily, and then 10 years ago would have been really difficult to deal with it. Now would be kind of a nightmare to deal with it, but 10 years from now, it's like
yeah,
you could and it's like you could have dealt with it peacefully, and the longer you put off, the more you're sort of guaranteeing like a future bloodbath over this stuff. And it's like, hey, I want to avoid the bloodbath. That's why I would like to deal with it peacefully. But everyone who tries to deal with it peacefully through criticism and through standing up for freedom of speech and so on, we're condemned as evil. And the good people, we're told, are the ones who are basically pushing this off to a future generation to deal with it through a bloodbath. And it's like, wait a minute, how are you the good guys when you're basically guaranteeing a future bloodbath over this? And the people who want to deal with things peacefully through criticism and speech are the evil ones who must be silenced and condemned and locked up and so on. So yeah, these are absolutely insane times. Anyway, we got some super chats here. Let's go through these real quick and see. Some people just joke in super chats and stuff like that, and other people have questions or comments. Thank you for sacrificing your time for the glory of God. Yeah, it's what we do. Love you, D Wood. Keep doing what you're doing. I'll try. Also, second confirmation that AP is the cause of tardiness. Oh, yeah. So you don't know about that. We're always like habitually 10 minutes late when we live stream, but people noticed recently then whenever I have on a different guest that we're right on time. And so they've solved the mystery. John West says it's not irrational to recognize the danger of Muslims. Yeah, it's you have people shouting from the rooftops what they want to do. And when you say, hey, these guys are acknowledging what they want to do, you're called a bigot for saying, hey, they say they want to do this. Like in your neck of the woods, you have people like Ali Dawa posting videos on YouTube saying that once he gets his way, he's going to execute apostates. He's totally fine on YouTube. YouTube doesn't, but if anyone were to say, this is what we're going to do to Muslims, they'd be banned. Now, that's just absolutely amazing. He's calling for mass public executions of people based on their religious beliefs, and YouTube thinks it's totally fine because he's a Muslim. What are your views on the political situation in Germany right now? Please pray for our government that it can deal accordingly with the Islamic invasion. Do you also follow what's going on in other places? If so, what are your thoughts on Germany?
Not as much, but I think in Germany, they had like the whole mass immigration thing in about 2015 and all that, and then Angela Merkel saying we can do this, and there has been a massive backlash against that more recently. I think they have tightened up their rules and massively cut down immigration, and well done to them. And I think some other countries are also doing this, Sweden and one or two other countries too. So it's encouraging to see that some countries in the West are starting to wake up and are starting to say, no, hang on, we can't just carry on like this. We can't just keep on importing all these people. And it's because it is affecting our culture and it is changing our culture and so on. So yes, and I'm encouraged by that, and I want to see more of that.
And it really seems to me like there's just going to be something's going to happen, and people are going to like rally around it and say this is enough, and then it seems like something's going to happen in one European country, and then other European countries are going to say, "Oh, we can do something."
Well, it is things like the rape gangs, but also generally sexual offences being committed far more, much more likely by immigrant population than by others, and there is a breaking point, and then obviously if a terrorist attack succeeds, there's a huge. But we saw massive riots, of course, here in the UK last year with the Axel Rudakabano attacks, and people assuming that he was Muslim. Well, maybe he is. The rumor is he attends mosque in prison. Who knows? The government did recently classify him as a terrorist and so on. But this kind of thing does cause breaking point. Again, massive publicity and pressure on the government over grooming gangs earlier this year. There are things that will ultimately cause people to act. And yes, certain classes, you never know when they're quite going to come, can force a massive change in policy, and we'll see it.
Thanks, John Kelly. God bless you for speaking out. From Robert. Tesbot says, hi, UK breaks my heart. It's over. How do I get to USA? Yeah, I mean, we may be in a situation where people are going to have to start seeking asylum from the UK to get to a place. Rough stuff.
There's a thing, isn't there, though? Because that Glaswegian shopkeeper who was murdered by Muslims some years ago now. He was an Ahmadiyya Muslim, and his family had sought asylum from Pakistan. Right, because they were persecuted. The Ahmadis, the Ahmadiyas, are persecuted in Pakistan. And what safety did he have here? He got brutally murdered by a Muslim here. So the UK is not a safe place for Ahmadiyya or potentially Islamic converts like Asha Bibi, who was sentenced to death for blasphemy in Pakistan, sought asylum, and it seems very likely the UK government said, no, she won't be safe here. They had to send her to Canada instead. So yes, the UK is not a safe place for people who are seeking asylum from Islam.
Peter says, everybody report Islam is my identity. Was that someone in the chat earlier? Because I banned someone for spamming stuff. I don't know if that was the same person. 7 a.m. live stream. What's this insanity? This is like the middle of the night for you, David. Yeah, no, I haven't gone to sleep yet. I've been up. D-Wood and AP, keep up the good works, but God's sake, stop saying Tawheed means oneness, Islam means submission. As Christian Arabic speakers rightly translate, Tawheed is unification and Islam as surrender. JG, I know you hear this stuff from Christian Prince, but don't come over here just telling us to modify everything to bring it in line with Christian Prince. Not interested. Morning. Very rude. God bless you, Brother David. Finally, a decent hour for the live stream for Europeans. Keep up the dismantling of Islam. Yeah, I was saying that before we started. And then I said it once we started that a lot of people complain that our live streams are at the wrong time. Can watch this one. If UK really care, they should treat Tommy better. Yeah, that's true. Why is it that when all Muslims have had a near-death experience, they all experience hell? I've actually never looked into Muslim near-death experiences, but that might be interesting. D Wood, get a mod or something. You have Islamists spamming threats at you in chat. Yeah, I did ban someone, but I don't know if there are more. Sturzenberger got stabbed. Policeman got killed. That's your religion of hate for you. Stefan says, good work, Tim. Thoughts on the monarch's indifference on Islam? So much for being the head of the church. Is there anything the king can or should do?
Yes, there is. In the coronation service, which we had, was that 2023 now? He is appointed head of the church, and there's all this stuff about Christianity in there, and the Bible is presented as like the most valuable thing in the world and the lively oracles of God. And the king insisted on having Muslims and people from other faiths participating to some degree in that service, even though it's a Christian service. Now, they weren't actually able to say anything because there are actually quite strict rules in the Church of England. You can't have a multi-faith thing. You can't have prayers to another God. And we didn't do that. But he made a point of involving people from other faiths in there and trying to say, oh, no, I'm not. I'm multi-faith and all this kind of stuff. He could actually just say, I'm a Christian and this country is a Christian country and promote Christianity, as Queen Elizabeth effectively did. And every time she gave a Christian message, Christmas message, she said something about Christianity in it. So he could be more explicitly Christian, and his role enables him to do that if he wanted to do that. But that's not the way he seems to be going at the moment.
Says, ask him about Tommy Robinson. Do you have any thoughts on Tommy or?
Tommy, I followed his case, David, and I have a lot of respect for him. I don't agree with everything he's ever said or done. Don't suppose he agrees with everything he's ever said or done either. He's in prison right now for contempt of court because he insisted on showing this film about this case of a kid who was bullied in school. I don't think he should have shown that film. I think the court judgment said there's not enough evidence to support what Tommy is saying. But Tommy is someone who won't back down. And so he progressed and proceeded to show that film. Now he's in prison. It's outrageous that he's being kept in solitary confinement for something like 21 hours a day. It's incredibly bad for his mental health. I think it's very shocking that this is happening. I'm pleased to see there's international support to try and stop that. Elon Musk is funding his lawyers, I understand, on it. And I hope they manage to get somewhere with it. Because that is not how they don't even treat the Muslim grooming gang perpetrators like that, right?
That's right.
So why are they treating Tommy like that? It's not a violent offence or anything. All he's done is breach a court order. You should not be held in solitary confinement for 9 months for doing that.
No, you'll lose your mind because I've been in prison and I've been in solitary, and you start losing your mind. So I can verify that. And I was there for a couple months. He's there for a lot longer. As far as because people always say, look at this thing Tommy did, and look at this messed up thing. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about the dangers of Muslims recruiting inmates. You're getting a different kind of person. You're getting a person who's willing to defy the government and so on, things like that. But here's the thing. You take someone who has messed up throughout their life and give him the right ideas. That's also someone who will stand his ground and do the right thing, even if everyone's blasting away at him. So it's basically certain personality traits of people who are willing to take risks and so on. That can be taken and used for bad purposes. For committing crimes and so on. Or you can say, hey, here's a guy who's committed crimes and so on, and he's a risk taker, and he's willing to, and that's a person who will actually stand his ground against an entire nation just blasting away at him and so on. So it's I look at it as like some of the people who are willing to stand their ground against this stuff are people who have certain characteristics where they probably gotten in trouble with the law and stuff in their lives and so on. So, try to take people where they're at and get them to do the best they can. And, so it's a weird situation, but the things the charges against him are things like, I was locked up. I never saw anyone locked up for those things. Those are things you fine people for. You would find.
No, you don't lock people up. Yeah. That's the other thing. You shouldn't even be locked up for that kind of offense. So it is really bad. It's another example of discriminatory justice system.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I said this to AP in a live stream a while back. I said I would, if a girl was being groomed by a grooming gang, I would trust a randomly selected prison inmate from the United States to protect her before I would trust a British police officer to protect her. And I said that because things are different in the UK because you have such a high Muslim population. You have so many people in there for being grooming gangs and so on. In America, that is bottom of the barrel. If you are in there for doing something to a kid, something sexual to a kid, you're going to have a miserable time. You're going to have to check into protective custody because the other inmates will beat you. They will beat you senseless, take all your stuff, and you're either going to die or you're going to check into protective custody. And so these are guys who they would not put up with that. And calling them names and calling them Islamophobes would not stop them from protecting a child and so on. And you got police who will do everything they can to protect the groomers and so on. So anyway, Anyway, the only point there is sometimes people can have good characteristics that they misuse, and you can kind of say, okay, you misused those, you got into trouble, but you are the right person for another kind of job, and try to steer people on the right path. But as far as Tommy, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care if he had done all kinds of things. If he's the one guy standing against the grooming gangs, then he's got my support on that. Let's see. Good guess, but in your money, people don't awake enough. I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about, Stefan? Gotta go. Thanks for an informative presentation. Yep. And no comment from Colin. Thanks. And Stefan says, I love the UK, but without Islam again. Good guest. All right. Well, that wraps everything up. Thanks to Tim. Again, guys, the brand new book, The Challenge of Islam. It's Tim Dieppe from Christian Concern. I have the link to the YouTube channel, Wait, is Islamic Truth back? Oh, man. Okay, here's the troll they were talking about. You're messing with the wrong people. We are 2 billion in number. Be very careful, or you could be next, like Salwan Momika. So what? Salwan Momika desecrated a Quran? He did this? That's what you're threatening me for? Did that go the way you thought it was? Islamic Truth. That's what I think of your threats, and now I'll just ban you. And that's what I think of everyone who's going to harm me. If you want to do something, here's my throat. But you're not going to do anything. All right. Sorry about that, Tim. We have a rule here. When people threaten, we go ahead and do the opposite of what they demand. And I just wish more people did the exact same thing. All right. So,
very good.
So link to Christian Concerns YouTube channel is in the description box, and a link to the new book on Amazon is also in the description box. So everyone be sure to grab a copy and read it and get your mind around what's going on in the UK, because even if you're not in the UK, seems like something everyone in the entire world needs to stand their ground on, and we need to help. We need to help our friends in the UK as much as we can. And so get the book, check it out, learn what's going on there, and expose Islam. And we'll catch you all next time.
Great. Thanks.